everyone. Welcome to the Daily Fantasy Rankings DK Down Under show for round 4 of the AFL, our special preview for the Sydney Swans and the Western Bulldogs clash on Thursday night here. We're brought to you by Daily Fantasy Rankings in conjunction with rotogrinders.com. We are here with myself, Smatho 10, and my co-host to my right here, the big hef, Tristan Heffernan. How are you today, mate?
Really good, Smatho. Settling in nicely to this footy season.
Excellent. Now, for our Rotogrinders viewers today, make sure you get onto rotogrinders.com and check out our free AFL previews for every slate of DraftKings this round 4. Also, for premium subscribers, make sure you get to Rotogrinders LineupHQ to get all of our DFR projections into the cruncher there to build your DraftKings teams. Very successful weekend for our viewers last week. Hef, let's get stuck into this particular match on Thursday night. We have the Sydney Swans hosting the Western Bulldogs. This game is a bit of a coin flip at the moment, but there is a slight lean to the Swans at the moment. The total points is 123.5 and the spread's just a lazy 1.5 points. Currently in team news, we don't have the actual team list yet. That's 24 hours prior to the game. But soon you'll probably see that Ruckman Sam Naismith might get named after his hamstring injury. And the Bulldogs have been forced into a change with their premium midfielder Josh Dunkley out for 6 weeks with an ankle injury. They've also announced the Bulldogs that a young player, a debutant, Lewis Butler in defence, will get his first game for the Bulldogs as well. For DraftKings, they have posted a $60,000 contest with $20,000 on top for the winner. Hef, we'll build a bit of a DraftKings call throughout the show. Let me start you with some quick facts for our viewers. First of all, the Bulldogs as a team are giving the second most fantasy points up in the league so far, whereas Sydney are the second least in fantasy scoring overall. And the Bulldogs are actually giving up a stack of fantasy points throughout the middle of the field. So have with all that in mind, what are your general thoughts on the slate at the moment?
That looks pretty lopsided, those numbers there from the perspective of these two teams, even though the actual result of the game is really close to call. One thing to note, that's obviously based on just the 3 games this year, and round 1 was many months ago, so it's quite a small sample. I'm not going to get too drawn into those numbers, but it definitely does make you want to lean to playing the Sydney guys. Just they have been really stingy the last couple of weeks, and the Bulldogs are more of a free-flowing attacking style of play. So leaning Sydney players on that, but we've got to get into each position and judge them on their merits.
All right. As always, we like to start with the ruckman on the team. And also, there's not many choices in this particular slate. Now, as you can see here, we've got pretty much 4 viable options with possibly only 2 to 3 players who will be selected for this particular match. Up the top there is Callum Sinclair at 6,300, and then Tim English is the main ruckman for the Bulldogs at 5,800. I did touch on Naismith with the questionable tag there at 5.3. And then McLean actually got a game last week as a late in at 3,900, but I'm pretty doubtful he'll be keeping his place in the team. Who are you looking at in this particular position here? Because we talked about Tim English on our previous shows on the Down Under show, that he's not exactly a quality ruckman, but he did play a quality game last week.
Yeah, he's still a young player, English. He's really mobile. He's still got a bit of growing to do and filling out to compete with the really strong ruckman. But he really surprised a lot of people last week. It's been a really good target to play ruckman against Tim English because he has given up a lot of fantasy points. But I think in this slate, it's really going to come down to who Sydney select to go within the rucks. I'm a big fan of Sam Naismith. I think he's a really solid, big, strong ruckman. And if they look to get him back from injury, I think he can have the measure of English, and I really like the cheaper price tag on him. So if Sydney are happy to go with Naismith, he'd be my top selection here. If they're going to stay with the Sinclair McLean combination that they went with last week, I reckon you can play all 3 in that case. Sinclair really dominated English last time they played, but then English has the bonus of being the sole ruck, whereas the other 2 guys are sort of spreading the load. And McLean's 48 at that sort of price that he had last week. A repeat of that would be quite handy as well. So hopefully they pick Naismith, because that makes my decision a lot easier.
All right, let's put Naismith in our core for now. If we can then always pivot somewhere else if he's not named. Let's move on to the defence, and obviously one of the stars of the competition in this position is the Sydney Swans' Jake Lloyd. He's currently second in the competition this year in fantasy scoring for defenders, outside of Sam Doherty for Carlton, and DraftKings have put up an $8,000 price tag for him. You can also see some merit here in other players as well, but what are your thoughts on Jake Lloyd at that price tag?
Look, there's no doubt that Lloyd is the best defender on the slate, but that is a really high price tag for a defender, $8,000. So that doesn't make him quite the obvious player that he would otherwise look. He's the top guy. Whether you want to spend the money here or other positions is the decision you've got to make.
Now, we mentioned before the Bulldogs are leaking quite an amount of fantasy points in pretty much all the positions. Can we look at Sydney players such as Callum Mills at 5,300? Look, he only just came off a poor performance last week, so obviously the ownership might be low there.
Yeah, Mills is a guy that stood off the page to me with this salary set up on DraftKings. He's usually got a really high floor, Callum Mills. So last week's 38 was a bit of an aberration, I think. You can usually bank on him to get more around 60, 70 without too much trouble, and that 5,300 price tag, I think that's a really good return. Couple that with the fact that the Bulldogs do give up points to defenders down back. I'm really keen to play a fair bit of Mills. And the Sydney defenders do correlate really well together. They like to chip the ball around. So the likes of Lloyd, Dawson, and even Harry Cunningham, along with Mills, I think going with two Sydney defenders is a really strong play.
Yeah, very strong. What is also very strong, his projection on our DFR cheat sheets. A lot of value that he's priced at 5,300. One more play before we move on. The debutant, Lewis Butler at 2,700. Any thoughts on him going into your core or maybe as a GPP play?
I wouldn't really put him in the core, but if you do have a lot of high-priced guys that you're really keen to play, I don't think it's bad to throw Butler into that price because he can't do too much damage at the 2,700, and if you can make that up with the high-priced players that you're looking to select, and obviously if Butler goes off, then you get the best of both worlds. Excellent.
Well, let's move on to the midfield. And also we touched on the Bulldogs with their dramas through their midfield. They don't have Lockie Hunter due out suspension, and they've lost Josh Dunkley with an ankle injury. So that just leaves one of their premium studs in Jack Macrae as the highest salary midfielder on the slates. We also have Marcus Bontempelli, which is a popular player for the Bulldogs, but he has not been going too well in the fantasy stakes. Should we look at these two particular guys, or should we be looking elsewhere?
Okay, Macrae's definitely a guy we need to look at, even with that high price tag. He can definitely be the highest scorer on the whole slate. And with this injury to Josh Dunkley, it means Jack Macrae's role is going to be around the ball the whole game. So he's a guy I'm really keen to look at. Bontempelli also plays the same role, and he's no doubt their best player, Bontempelli. But the problem is that Sydney like to use a player called George Hewitt in a tagging role, and he might go and run with Bontempelli all night. So for that case, Bontempelli, it's hard for these players to break when they've got the tagger running with them, and it really caps their ceiling. So for that case, I don't want to have too much Bontempelli.
On the Sydney side, obviously there are some veterans in the team with Luke Parker and Josh Kennedy. I'm really liking Josh Kennedy's price at 6,700. Would that drive up the ownership for Kennedy?
I think he's going to be really chalky, Kennedy, at that price. These shorter quarters, it seems to be suiting him. He's spending a lot of time around the ball. And, I think he's nearly the best priced midfielder on the slate, I reckon.
There's another bloke here, the young midfielder, Ollie Florence, who's at 6,400. He's been attending all the centre bounce appearances for the Swans. Is that something we can also look in our core?
Yeah, they seem to have a lot of faith this year in Florent. All three games this year have been at least 70, so that's a really high floor at that 6,400 price tag. You can can do a lot worse than having Florida in your teams, that's for sure. But he might not have the ceiling that a guy like Parker, Kennedy, McRae, and even we touch on Bailey Smith when we get to the forwards. So keep that in mind. He's more of a safer pick, Florence, than one who might win you a tournament by himself.
Excellent. All right, well, let's move on to the forwards. And look, these two teams are not really known for their fantasy strength in this position. But what we find here is a lot of dual position players. So a lot of midfielders and forwarders are in this position. It will be popular to pick these dual position players. Is there anyone out in this particular spot that we could make a case for?
Well, there's two guys that stand out to me. One is Bailey Smith, who's been playing a lot of on-ball, a lot of midfield time this year. And so to be able to pick him up forward is it's like getting another midfielder in your team, which is always a good thing. I think that price at 7,300, I think that's very reasonable. Looking for a bit more value, I think from the Swans side, Rowbottom is forward eligible, but last week he got a lot of time in the midfield, and he has shown that he can score really big scores in the reserves competition here. So I think he's a guy with big upside, Rowbottom, and he's one of my favourite cheap players on the whole slate.
Excellent. Look, your final thoughts here, Hef, because I've done the optimisation on the RotoGrinders LineupHQ, and it's thrown out a lot of Sydney players at their particular salaries. Will this be something that I should be getting away from, or should be embracing the Sydney kind of stacks for this game?
I think everything points to Sydney from a fantasy data perspective, but keep in mind, a lot of times this year it has been a winning play to go a bit contrarian if you're looking to stack a certain side. So I wouldn't sleep on a Bulldog stack because they are a good team and they do dominate the ball when they're at their best. But if you're looking in cash games, I would definitely lean to the Sydney side of things.
Excellent. Now, for all your AFL data research, make sure you get to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. We all have the 3 tools for AFL fantasy research, such as the cheat sheets, data tools such as correlations, points against, player scores. It's all there on our site, dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. And make sure you read our daily slate previews on rotogrinders.com. It's all free for readers of that particular site. Hef and I will be back with the slate preview for Friday night's game between the Giants and Collingwood. Make sure you look at us up at RankingsDFS on Twitter, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hef, thanks for your thoughts today, mate.
Thanks, mate. Good luck, everyone. Hopefully we don't see another American take home the money this week.
Let's see if we can do that. Okay, mate. Thanks very much.
Thank you.